Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Reuben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Reuben Swartz here. Welcome to Sales for Nerds. It's our annual tradition of the year-end episode being a solo episode where I just talk about something important that I feel like I need to pass on to you that I've learned over the year or several years in some cases. Tonight, I've got a glass of Domaine Vacheron Sancerre. It's a Pinot Noir from the Loire region of France. It's nice and light and quite tasty. Cheers. Let's dive in. It is the season of annual planning. And I know that year after year after year, I would go through the annual planning processes, if you will. It felt kind of like planning theater in a way because I would do all this stuff, but I don't know if it was really very effective. Kind of go through what went right and what didn't go so right. Usually the stuff that went right was, hey, we did a good job for our clients. Some of them asked us to do more work for them. Some of us gave us great referrals. And usually the stuff that didn't go so well was all the sales and marketing stuff that was outside of those referrals or repeat customer projects. And so typically what I would do is say, okay, well, we tried this thing, we had it set up in Salesforce this way or whatever, and we need to make it more nuanced because of blah, 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 blah. So I would take something that was probably already too complicated and make it more complicated. And then for the first few weeks, months, whatever, I would try to follow the new process. And eventually I would fall off the wagon because it was just not really built for me and the way I think and how much time I had and energy to devote to this. It might have been great for the enterprise sales teams of my clients that I was dealing with, but not so great for me. So what I realized eventually was there are all these myths that we tend to absorb about sales and marketing. Like we've got to be some kind of sales rock star, some kind of marketing genius, some kind of master networker to make all this stuff work. And that if we are one of those sort of service-oriented people, maybe a little introverted, maybe not so excited about selling to begin with, this just isn't going to work for us. So we got to be that other person. And I would get frustrated. I would hear about something. Oh, got to get this CRM or this email tool, run some Google ads, run some other kind of ads, sponsor trade show booths, whatever it might be. Think, this is a great tactic. This is going to work for me this time. Get real excited about it. Find it didn't work so well. Say, it's all word of mouth anyway. Then get frustrated, find some new shiny tactic, kind of go through what I call the cycle of doom. And you end up thinking like, oh, I'm just no good at sales, or I'm having all these conversations, but no one wants to buy. Everyone's just a tire kicker, etc. And then you end up in this feast or famine cycle where you're praying for referrals. And then when you get a referral, there's this enormous pressure to close, especially when I had payroll to make. Whether or not you're trying to really focus on what's right for the client, there's some subconscious pressure in there. And so I'll try to figure out what to do, and then I'd repeat the cycle of doom. And I think the good news is for you, if you're listening to this, all of that was unnecessary because, like Yoda says, already know that what you need. Like we have the right tools. We just have to focus them the right way. We don't have to be that outgoing rock star salesperson. Nothing wrong with that if that's who you are, as long as you're doing it ethically. Great, good for you. But I invite you to think about something that I like to think of like what's your easiest sale? And typically it is a repeat customer come back saying, hey, let's do another one of those projects. We want to do it for the West region or whatever it might be. Or I heard the great things you did for the West region for my buddy so-and-so. We want to do something similar at my firm. Let's do it, right? It doesn't even feel like a sale. You're just like walking into something, having a good conversation, getting a great client, doing great work, and hopefully repeating that in a virtuous cycle. And contrast that with the hard sales cycles where you're trying to convince people and meet with them, and you're just not getting great energy. You're trying to overcome objections. And even if you get to the proposal stage, a lot of questions and problems around the pricing and can they get discounts and so on. And then if you actually win the deal, then that's actually the worst case scenario, because then you have one of those nightmare projects that really sucks the life out of you, not just on that project, but it infects your other projects and the rest of your business and your life in many cases. So here's how I've learned to think of this over time. If you are in a relationship business, and if you're a consultant, you're probably in a relationship business, you are in a conversation business. Think of this like a doctor versus a used car salesman. Doctor isn't trying to pitch everybody, not standing outside at the entranceway to the hospital saying, hey, do you need shoulder surgery? Do you need shoulder surgery? Do you need shoulder surgery? That would be ridiculous. But that's kind of what the used car salesperson is doing. They've got a certain set of things. You walk in, they see dollar signs, and they're pitching. Doctor is not trying to pitch everybody. And the more specialized the doctor, the more time they're going to spend actually doing their surgery and the less time they're going to spend qualifying people, because the referral network is going to do a lot of that qualification for them. Right? If you're the neurosurgeon, they only send people to you who need brain surgery or might need brain surgery, right? A very small sliver of the population. They're not sending everybody there. Of course, even the neurosurgeon needs to have a consultation, a conversation with the patient, because still ultimately a relationship business, which means it's a conversation business. So what does this mean? Let's distill this down to its simplest form. And I'm going to give you a sales process that you can go use starting the second you get off this podcast, and you can use it for years. There's 2 steps. So get ready. It's really complicated. Figure out exactly who you want to have conversations with and have conversations with them. That's it. And of course, I'm presenting it as step 1, step 2. It's more of a cycle than a linear process, because you need to have some of those conversations to figure out exactly who you should be having conversations with. It's going to take some of that effort. So step 1, let's think about who should we talk to. Let's get what I would like to think of as cask strength positioning. Cask strength, for those of you who don't drink whiskey, this is what the whiskey comes out of the still at, 50-something percent, 53% alcohol, and then they dilute it back down to something they usually put in the bottle. We want our positioning to be as strong as possible. We want to make it really clear who our ideal clients are, not our possible clients, our ideal clients. Ideal client profile is very powerful. Possible client profile doesn't mean we can't take on people who don't exactly match our ideal client profile, but PCP is a very dangerous drug. Will mess up your positioning, mess up your website, mess up all kinds of things. Let's focus on our ideal client profile. It makes sales and marketing so much easier, right? You're giving a pitch that's going to resonate with that ideal person. Your website can speak to that person, your social media, your lead magnets, your virtual sales team, i.e. your referral partners. They can know exactly who to refer. Imagine if you're a brain surgeon and people keep sending you knee patients. That wouldn't be very good, right? We don't want to be wishy-washy and say we're a doctor. We want to say we're the neurosurgeon. And I think the other thing that's important is, one, it's going to make your projects much more successful, because you're going to be doing that great, meaningful work that you really like. And you also have limited time in your days, months, years, in your lifetime. So we don't always have a choice, but wouldn't we want to be intentional about using that time in our highest calling, if you will? So make sure that you're using it well. Those slots you have to serve clients, wouldn't we rather have an ideal client in there than a potential client? Sometimes we don't have all our slots full, and we can take a possible client, and it's fine. Not necessarily the end of the world, but let's try to be intentional about having as many ideal clients there as possible. So typically when people hear this, they say, okay, yeah, that's great, but I can help everyone. I mean, I've literally had people say my service can help every human being on the planet. And I typically say, well, that's probably true. It probably can help every human being on the planet, but how many of them really want to pay you for that? Right? That's usually a big distillation point. Like, how many people have the money and would like to give some of it to you in exchange for what you offer them? People say, I don't want to exclude people. Well, that's a nice thought. We don't want to exclude anybody, but you're excluding your ideal clients if you're busy with your possible clients. You're excluding helping your ideal clients if you are busy running really complicated sales processes to try to close people who don't really belong with you. They belong with the knee doctor down the hall. A lot of people say, well, I have 2 or 3 or 10 different ideal client profiles. And sometimes this can be hard, right? Especially if you've been in business for a while and you haven't kept a tight handle on this, you end up with some scatter, if you will, in who you help. And that's fine too. But you can't have more than one ideal client profile. right? That's what it means to be ideal. We have this notion that you can sort of have as many ideals as possible, but really it's just there's one ideal client profile. So figure out how to consolidate into an ideal client profile. Sometimes it's a matter of here often, where I make most of my revenue is, let's just say, corporate execs or something like corporate projects. But my heart is in the nonprofit projects. The problem is it just doesn't pay enough for me to make a living. And one way to resolve this might be to think about, well, my ideal client is the corporate exec. My passion project, my hobby is the nonprofits. So maybe I don't try to close the nonprofits. Maybe I go do some stuff pro bono with all the money I make from focusing on corporate. That might be one way. That's not the only way necessarily to resolve that, but one way to resolve that dilemma. So I always tell people, like, you don't want to have ands or ors in your ideal client profile. So people say, I help busy manufacturers or e-tailers. That's a problem, right? We got to pick one or the other, or we have to distill them into some common attribute that defines them both. So sometimes it's, I help small business owners or corporate executives who blah, 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 blah. And maybe it's not really a matter of business owners or corporate executives. It's they need to have a certain amount of income to afford your services, and they're going through certain things. They have certain characteristics, and you can just sort of name that and package that in a way that different people, maybe in different industries, different positions, but the right people can say, aha, that's me. Right? What we really want is to have people say, aha, that's me, or aha, that's my friend Reuben. He needs to talk to you. It really helps if we can tie it to an industry or something else where there's going to be a lot of people coming together in formal associations and online communities, et cetera, where word can spread, where they have publications, newsletters, et cetera. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. The other thing is, it's just scary. You feel like you are giving up business. So if you haven't heard this from me before, get ready for the world's cheesiest marketing acronym. If you've heard this from me before, just bear with me for a second. Here's how I think about getting to that ideal client profile with a mnemonic called mega positioning. The M stands for magnetic. And the idea, of course, is we want to attract our ideal clients. The problem is that people want to attract everybody and repel nobody. That's not how it works in business. That's not how it works in physics. Magnets have two poles of equal and opposite strength. And we want to dial up the power of that magnet, not just to attract the right people, but so that the wrong people who are not a fit for what we do, they get referred to the right person, right? The neurosurgeon doesn't want to attract the knee patients and vice versa. So they don't talk about all the ailments that you could deal with. They talk about the one that they specialize in. The stronger we can make that magnet, the more work it can do for us. The more the referrals we get. First of all, we're going to get more better referrals, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but it's so much easier if someone says, I've got a brain problem. You're like, oh, here's the neurosurgeon. If someone's like, I have a medical problem, well, who knows what doctor you might or might not refer them to. But the referral pool is so big, you're going to get fewer referrals. So anyway, we want to make that magnet as strong as possible. This means we're going to end up trying to exclude people, not because we don't like them, but because they're going to be better served elsewhere. Right? It's like if you have the spiciest Thai restaurant in town and someone hates spicy food, you don't want to try to convince them to eat the chili peppers, right? Just go somewhere else. It's totally fine. But you don't want to dilute what you're known for, what you're great at, what you love, to try to accommodate everybody. Right? You don't have the bandwidth for that. So what will happen when you try to dial up the strength of the magnet, there's going to be this little part of your brain that says, okay, Reuben, I think I get what you're saying. That makes sense. But I'm scared to let go of some of these possible clients, some of these folks I've worked with in the past, some of these folks that are in my pipeline, maybe some of these folks that could conceivably work with me in the future. Totally normal thought. It's a lizard brain thought, right? We're scared of scarcity. We're programmed that way. We're scared of exclusion. Totally fine. And you can look at all the spreadsheets and all the numbers and run them and see why having really powerful magnetic positioning is going to be better for you. And it will not help with this problem because it's an emotional problem. So we need an emotional way to solve it. And it took me years to figure this out because I could do this stuff for my clients, no problem. And I struggled with it for my own business because I was trying to apply logic to an emotional problem. So the way I found to deal with this is E for easy. We are scared that we're going to make our market smaller rather than larger. We think this is a bad thing, even though even the small market is like huge and more than big enough for us to serve. And if for some reason we serve the whole market, we can always expand it later, right? There's nothing that says we are committing to this for a lifetime, but we've got to start somewhere. And we want to start somewhere where we can have an easy time with sales and marketing. So whenever you hear that little voice in your head, worried about getting too focused, think, do I want sales and marketing to be easy or hard? Do I want to have more sales like the easiest sale I ever had, or more sales that were total slogs, like the worst sale I ever tried to do, right? I don't know about you, but I want things to be easy. There's plenty of things that I enjoy a challenge in life. I'm not like, ooh, sales and marketing, I wish that was harder. So that's the way to handle that little voice in your head when you're trying to strengthen that magnet. Now, how do we know when we've got it to the right strength? That's where G comes in. G stands for 800-pound gorilla, right? We're tiny. We're not 800-pound gorillas in the big market, right? If you're a consultant, you're not competing with Accenture and McKinsey and whatnot. And we don't want to compete on their playing field. Doesn't make sense. We're going to lose. We're going to make ourselves miserable. So we want to define the playing field so that we are the 800-pound gorilla of it. Right? We are the neurosurgeon for this particular city or whatever the relevant metaphor might be, but make it tight enough that you are the obvious choice. And it used to be that the way this got defined was just by default, by geography. And now with so much consulting happening globally, it's really hard to just have a geographic issue with those. For some people it is, right? It's like, I am the person who shows up at your office in person to help you with this stuff. And that for some people, that's a huge differentiator. Obviously, it's not going to work for everybody. So you need to figure out what your playing field is where you're going to be the 800-pound gorilla. Now, when we go through all this, it's going to be tempting to think, well, gosh, if I was like Steve Jobs or whatever, this would be so much easier. And that's where the A comes in to remind us that we have to be authentic. We have to be who we are and show up as ourselves, show up as fully ourselves. First of all, it's exhausting trying to be someone else. I know I tried to impersonate sales reps for a long time, and it was just really irritating. Secondly, when we try to impersonate somebody else, other people can tell that something's off. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a nefarious scam artist or anything like that, but you're trying to be somebody else. And that, because we're social creatures and we're tied into social cues, we're like, something is not right here, right? So even if it's just you being nervous, just show up as yourself. Don't worry about being somebody different. Obviously, you want to be the professional version of yourself and all that good stuff, but you got to be yourself. That's mega positioning, magnetic, easy, 800-pound gorilla, authentic. And at the end of the day, I like to think of the bar test, if you will, right? Let's imagine that you're at the bar and your ideal client is brought over by somebody who's a great referral partner and says, oh, I hear that blah, 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 right? Whatever it is that you do. And hopefully you have given that referral partner the right non-jargony, easy to remember, easy to repeat, easy to recall in the right moment and then pass on so that they know exactly what you do. Often that's not going to be the case. They're not going to know exactly. They're going to be like, this person's a doctor. Or this person's a head doctor or whatever. I don't know if it's brains or ear, nose, and throat, but they do something about heads. Again, the more we can be precise, the more we make it easy for somebody else to remember, the less we have to worry about this. But then if you say something like, I help busy business owners get unstuck with their business problems. And be like, okay, what does that really mean? All right, you got to distill it down to after you've had a few drinks and you're like not talking in the corporate BS jargon, MBA speak words. Just what does it mean in English or whatever the appropriate language is that someone gets from working with you? Keep it really easy. And then when you can describe things that way, make sure that you're describing them that way on your website. That when you talk to your referral partners, they are armed with those words. And of course, if you happen to be using Mimiran, there's that mission and positioning screen that goes through all this and lets you lay all this stuff out. So we want to talk to the people who obviously match our ideal client profile, which may be not just demographic, psychographic, et cetera, but often is based on certain events that happen, like someone just got promoted, therefore they need some things, or someone just lost a job or started a business or whatever. It's not just that they are a business owner, they just started a business, or they just hired their 10th employee, or they just hired their first VP of sales, something like that. Oftentimes there's a bunch of changes that go along with some of those events. And if you can build that into your ideal client profile, makes it much easier for the right people to find you at the right time. Because maybe that ideal client profile of the small business owner who blah, 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 like there's a zillion of those, but the ones who are actually eager to spend money with you right now are the ones who X, right? They just fired their first sales rep because it didn't work out and they're wondering what they did wrong or whatever it is. So we want to talk to those people. We also want to talk to people who serve those people in complementary ways. So, maybe if you are a business lawyer, you might want to talk to accountants who share your ideal client profile, for example. If you're a consultant who specializes in sales, maybe you have some marketing partners and you can work in tandem or trade off with them. And this is sort of the point behind BNI, right? Doesn't usually work very well in the consulting world because the consulting world isn't defined so geographically. But in most BNI chapters, you got like the sort of real estate circle. You got the mortgage broker, the agent, the painter, the insurance agent, et cetera. And whenever someone buys or sells a house, all of these people can be involved. If you can build that up for your world, you're going to be in good shape. So step 2, talk to them, right? Like actually have conversations. And this took me a long time to understand. It's so silly now that I understand it. Like, why did it take me so long to understand? But conversations are conversations, right? They are not newsletters, social media, AI, drip campaigns, etc. None of those things are bad. They can all be really good, in fact, but they are not what you need in a relationship business. If you're in an e-commerce business, that might be all you need. In a relationship business, those things should facilitate but not replace conversations, right? They should facilitate but not replace conversations. And a lot of people say, well, no one buys stuff on my website anyway, so I don't even care. Of course, I need to have conversations with people, but then you neglect sort of the flip side of this is you neglect the power of some of these other media, not to replace, but to facilitate the conversation, right? So we're not trying to get a visitor on our website to buy a big project from us. We're inviting them into our world, trying to convert them from a visitor to a lead to a conversation, right? Same thing with our email newsletter or social media presence. We're not hoping someone clicks add to cart. We're hoping somebody says, oh gosh, that's really interesting. I like what you said about this. I'm struggling with that. Can I get on your calendar? Now, of course, as they say, the fortune is in the follow-up. So it's not just about, okay, I had a conversation with that person. Oh, I went to a Zoom networking meeting and then I followed up and had my one-on-one. Great. Just like the newsletter. This is all good stuff. Highly recommend it. You should totally do it. But we don't want to stop with that initial one-on-one. We want to keep the conversations going, right? A single conversation does not make a relationship. Referral relationships take time to create and to nurture. Sales take time. Depending on which organization stats you cite, people have all these different metrics for how many conversations you need to have to turn a prospect into a client and blah, 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 blah. A lot of it's going to depend. A lot of it depends on the strength of your position, right? The stronger your positioning is, the fewer conversations you need to have, and the fewer conversations are going to be wasted because people are going to come in more ready to buy the right people at the right time. And also, you're going to waste less time with the knee patients when you're the neurosurgeon, right? So these things mutually reinforce each other. So this is a little hard to follow along with the math, but math compounds. So let's just say that you need to have 3 conversations to turn a prospect into a client. Depending on what you're doing and who you're doing it for, that may be a lot, maybe a little, maybe right on. But if you follow up 90% of the time, you lose over a quarter of your opportunities just because you didn't follow up. If you follow up 80% of the time, you lose half your opportunities just because you didn't follow up. Now, heaven forbid you need 5 or 6 conversations with somebody to turn them into a client, right? You can see as you move up the chain there, if you need 6 conversations, for example, you lose almost half at 90% follow-up. And you lose 3/4 at 80% follow-up before you even get to the proposal. Right? We're just talking about we just let this thing disappear. This is something that always infuriated me with typical CRMs, and one of the reasons Mimiran is built with different defaults, so you actually keep talking to people instead of having people just disappear if you don't explicitly follow up with them. But this is so important, and it's so disheartening when you feel like, gosh, I had 2 conversations with somebody, and then I forgot, I got busy, and then blah, 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 right? And those 2 conversations end up feeling wasted, and maybe they were wasted, versus, hey, I learned some interesting things. Maybe I can feed that back into my ideal client profile. Turns out that people with XYZ, they're not a great fit. No problem. Now I've learned that. But if they seem like a great fit, why am I not still talking to them? Right? So keep following up until you decide, I don't want to talk to this person anymore. Or if that person says, I don't want to talk to you anymore, that's fine too. When we have that waiting room full of patients, we don't feel a lot of pressure on any individual conversation or any individual prospect. We don't have to bend who we are. We don't have to make promises that we're not entirely comfortable with. We can just be ourselves, show up, try to help, and have fun doing it. And that lack of stress, that notion that, hey, I've got a lot of people to talk to. I'm not trying to close this person. I'm trying to help this person. It makes everything so much easier. And that means that you're much more likely to do it. Now, of course, one question is, well, how many people can you possibly talk to? And I'll put a link to a calculator. I've got a calculator on a webpage that sort of computes your quote unquote maximum social network. And it's a rough calculator. It's not, exact science, but the basic idea is, well, how many conversations can you have depending on how much time do you have for conversations? How long are those conversations? How many conversations repeat with people, right? Because you tend to talk to people, certain inner circle more often than not, and they're going to repeat a bunch, but a lot of other folks maybe will only get 1 or 2 conversations. And depending on how you do it, let's just say that it's in the order of magnitudes of hundreds is your maximum network of people that you can have conversations with and therefore really have relationships with. Maybe if you're crazy, it's low thousands, but realistically, it's not. It's low to mid hundreds. But the advantage of this is if you really have relationships with those people, your extended network through those people is thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And it's much better to have those real relationships, not just because it's more fun, but also just from a numbers perspective. That means you get access to those extended networks. And especially if you have that strong positioning that people can recall and relay at the right time, you're going to get better referrals from having a small group of referral partners that you actually talk to on a regular basis versus trying to blast out email newsletters to thousands of people and not getting good responses. So what do we need to actually make this happen? Because hopefully at this point you're saying, gosh, yes, it would be nice to know exactly who I want to talk to and actually talk to them. Why is this so hard? What do we need to make it easier, doable, sustainable, and so on? So first thing I think is, let's make it fun. If it's fun, you're going to keep doing it. And I would go through phases, I know, where I forced myself to cold call people. I would follow up with sort of like quote unquote leads from trade shows that weren't really leads. They were just like names. And it was awful. And I could force myself to do it for a little bit. And some people do it very successfully for a living, and more power to them. But it is not for me. It is for the birds. But having fun conversations where my positioning is doing a lot of the work to make sure that I'm likely to have conversations with people who want to talk about the same stuff I want to talk about, who with some reasonable probability are going to say, oh gosh, yes, I would like to get some help with that, please. That's actually fun. I can still remember, sort of have that muscle memory, the pain in my neck, the headache from like forcing myself to do this stuff when it wasn't fun. And of course it was not sustainable. And now I spend most of my day talking to people, and it is so much fun. And I have people say, Reuben, I can't believe you're an introvert. You just like, there's no way. And what I tell people is, Introvert doesn't mean we don't want to talk to people. It means we want to talk to people on our terms. And we have the power, especially as solo consultants, to define those terms and use our mega positioning to do a lot of the work for us so that our conversations are more fun. Next, practically, we need to know when we're supposed to talk to everybody, right? Like we have this big list of people, and I can't tell you how many lists of people I would stare at in spreadsheets and CRMs. Like, oh, I need to talk to all these people, but gosh, who do I talk to first? And it seems really silly. Like any approach would be better than staring at the list too long. But somehow I would just spend way too much time staring at the list. And as I've got better at having conversations with people, I found that this is a common issue that we have. I think it's just we get overwhelmed cognitively. We are not built for these giant lists and following up this way, right? We're built to wander around in a small tribe and just run into people organically. So make sure that every contact has a next conversation date and have it updated at a reasonable interval by default. So once you talk to somebody, it's going to set a next conversation date for you instead of relying on you to manually enter one or you don't talk to this person again. And this is done with tags and Mimiran, but you can do it with your spreadsheet or whatever. Just make sure that there's a reasonable default that you can override if needed, but the default is you keep talking to people. Next, block off time in your calendar to do this. I've done this. I hear such a common problem like, oh, following up with my prospects is my biggest priority. And then Friday afternoon, oh man, I got really busy and I didn't get around to following up with anybody. Well, we all have too much going on. And if you don't put it in there to begin with, it's very unlikely to happen. It's like if you really want to go to the gym, block off time to go to the gym in your calendar. It's not going to happen 100% of the time, but it's going to happen a whole lot more than if you don't put any time in the calendar and you just hope that magically time is going to appear, especially when it's something that we're trying to build as a new habit. So put that time in the calendar. If you don't have any client work going on, why not talk to people 4, 5, 6 hours a day, right? If you've got a ton of client work going on, it seems overwhelming. Maybe it's half an hour a week. But if you do that, you can keep those relationships nurtured instead of having them wither and die. It's like a garden. It's not like a light switch where you can turn it on and off or press pause and resume. It dies and you got to plant all over again. So just even if you can't do a ton, nurture the relationships that you have. I think there's this temptation to always be bringing new people in, but then neglecting the people that are already happy to talk to us. It's like, why go to a ton of effort to bring new people in when we're not talking to the people that we should already be talking to, right? So block off time on your calendar. Have an easy way to flip through the contacts that need following up, because you shouldn't be spending brain power thinking about, okay, who should I be talking to next? Have your system tell you, hey, it's time to talk to Reuben or whatever. Right? This is what call mode does in Mimiran. You can implement it in various ways in a spreadsheet or whatever. We want to be able to see notes from our past conversations, right? Like we want to pick up where we left off. The doctor should come in and kind of know what's going on with you when he or she walks in the room with you. We want to have that same capability with our relationships. We can be organized. We should know where people came from, who referred them, what we talked about last time, what we committed to, etc. And ideally, especially for us solo folks, be nice to have some peer accountability / encouragement / competition, however you want to think of it. I like to have this phrase, solo but not alone, right? We don't have to be on an island just because we're solo. We can have peers who encourage us. And it's one of the things that I love, logging into my system and seeing, oh, so-and-so's really kicking my butt this week in conversations. Good for him, good for her. Inspires me. Maybe I was going to do some quote unquote research on the web or whatever. Like, I can do that in off hours. Right now is the time I should be talking to people. Let's have some conversations. It's one of those things that sometimes you don't feel like doing it, like going to the gym, but you always feel better afterwards. So how do we actually do this? Right? It's a habit and it's going to take some time to inculcate. And it's a little scary to get started sometimes. Like, oh gosh, what that person I haven't talked to in forever. I don't know. It's going to be awkward. When I did, I would just call them up and say, hey, I've been meaning to talk to you for a long time. It's been so awkward. I feel embarrassed. So I would keep putting it off. And finally I was like, F it. I just can't put it off any longer. I'd just like to see what you're up to. You can even say, I was listening to this crazy guy on a podcast. He encouraged me to call people that I really want to talk to. I thought of you, blah, 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 blah. If something happens that triggers a memory of somebody, great excuse to call someone. And just keep it light, keep it easy. Like, don't overthink it. The whole idea is we're not trying to used car salesmen, all these people. We're trying to nurture relationships. And if we do that, good things will happen. Sometimes we'll find that, hey, I actually don't want to talk to this person anymore. Our relationship is complete. We've drifted apart. Maybe I realize they're a bad person. Maybe they don't like me for whatever reason, and it just feels weird. That's totally fine. Some people you want to talk to more often. It'd be great. You rekindle relationships that maybe had kind of withered a little bit. And you have a lot of ways to add value in these conversations, not just selling your service. You can make introductions. You can provide a sounding board. You can share a laugh. Sometimes I end up talking about kids or dogs or other stuff that isn't even related to work, all part of actually having a good time and relating human to human. And of course, focus on the human connection, not the networking, not the sales. That will come when you do this stuff. And of course, everyone who reads all the books, like I read these books when I was in my 20s, like, you need to build a network before you need it and blah, 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 blah. I was like, just didn't have the patience. I didn't have the maturity to understand how all that was supposed to work. Now I'm older, I'm slower. I'm like, let's just enjoy things. And it's like that saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Before you know it, your network is doing a lot of the work for you. So you don't have to, and it feels like magic. Now, as you do this, you'll also learn more about who your ideal client profile really is, and you can build that back into step number one and build a virtuous cycle. So if you're listening, hope you had a great 2023. All the best for 2024. And think about those people that you really miss talking to, really want to talk to them. Give them a call. Take that first person that comes to mind, press pause on this right now. Go give them a call, assuming you're in the appropriate time zone to do that. Let me know how it goes. If you get a voicemail, leave a voicemail. Send an email with a link to your calendar, and just be honest about it. Like I said earlier, I've been meaning to call you. I just haven't had the time or whatever, and then I feel embarrassed. It's been too long. Blah blah blah. Kids must be in college by now. Would love to catch up. Start easy. Start on the bunny slopes. Start with the people you know you're going to have a good conversation with if you talk to them, right? Don't try to do the hard things. When I started doing this, I was like, I'm going to go from the bunny slopes to the green slopes to the black diamond cold calling people. I'm like, I never need to do that actually, because there's so many people in my world that I don't have time to follow up with all of them anyway. So I'm not going to have to worry about cold calling anymore. I'm going to do just warm calling, right? Even if it's people requesting a lead magnet off my site, giving them a call. We're just talking about the subject of the lead magnet, which is something that they want help with, that I like talking about. It's not a cold call. It's just a fun, easy, informational call. And at some point, some of those lead to, oh, great, I would like to be able to do that too. How do I do that? Blah, blah, blah. How do you work with people? Not all the time. Don't care, right? There's no pressure on any individual call. So just to recap, we've got this super fancy, sophisticated two-step sales process that works for you if you are in a relationship business. Because if you're in a relationship business, you're in a conversation business. Your two-step sales process is know exactly who you want to have conversations with, have conversations with them. With that, Happy New Year. Cheers. I'm out. Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode,